Hello, Emrys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
oh, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and honor. As I said, I read your book, this one here, "The Wisdom of Frugality," with a tremendous amount of interest, uh, and it raises so many issues, so many things to think about, and so I could have endless amount of questions based on your book. But I will limit myself to a few thoughts, sort of about some of the issues that we could elaborate on, you and I, in our conversation, and see where it goes from there. So, Mike, since we are very close to a major election in the United States, and there seems to be so much at stake, and both sides, the Democrats and Republicans, are telling us that if they lost this election, we should expect some apocalyptic outcome, and then that the world would not be the same. Elon Musk not too long ago said in an interview that if Donald Trump loses this election, it will be the last election in American politics. And so there is a tremendous amount of fear, anticipation, so given the amount of emotion people invest in their in their politics, the political systems, and democracy, which I have a follow up question to this. Um, it sounds as if, you know, politics or the political system or the political regime is being perceived as indispensable to a good life in our current uh, democratic systems. Or are we being manipulated or even being dehumanized by the false promises of democracy, in the sense that uh, if if we don't elect the right person or the right party, our lives will be miserable, and maybe we'll end up suffering for a very long time.
That's a very complicated question. One thought I have immediately there is that when I talk about the good life and simple living and that sort of thing, I have to admit that one aspect of the good life the concept of the good life that I'm working with there that's missing is autonomy, is self-determination in political terms. Um, and that is something that's missing when you go back to a Greek philosopher like Aristotle. For Aristotle, the ideal good life is the life of a citizen who participates in the polis fully. And there's no doubt at all that in the United States at the moment, there is a lot of disillusionment with the political system because one's participation for most people consists of being asked to vote once every 4 years between candidates where perhaps a lot of people think there isn't sufficient difference. Now, I think there is still a significant difference between the candidates. Myself, I'm fairly partisan on this issue. I'm a registered Democrat, but still, I can understand where people are coming from there. Another aspect of the question that you've posed there has to do with the relationship between political realities and the quality of people's lives. And again, a lot of people think that the quality of their life is not sufficiently affected by who gets into power. Um, I think that is a mistake, actually. To give you concrete examples, I think that generally speaking, the Democrats, for instance, advocate free or relatively cheap healthcare for the less well off. And the Republicans tend to, they were vehemently opposed to Obamacare and this kind of thing. In general terms, the Democrats tend to be nudging us towards some redistribution of wealth, and the Republicans tend to favour tax cuts for the rich. I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, and if someone said, "Well, the Democrats aren't anything like as radical as they ought to be," or something like that, I'll be sympathetic to that view. Nevertheless, I do think it's a mistake to think that the who's in power makes no difference to the quality of people's lives. To give you one other example, I mean, there's workers' rights. Again, the party that most favours big business and capitalism, most favours that, tend to be somewhat anti-union. They tend to be against environmental regulations. They tend to be against worker safety regulations, this kind of thing. And obviously, if we have stronger environmental regulations, worker safety regulations, union rights, this kind of thing, then that does affect the quality of life of millions of people.
The reason I asked this question, because I had a very hard time conceptualizing, and you know much better than I do. Let's say someone like Diogenes or Epicurus, uh, caring about who is elected to office. They probably would think that it doesn't matter to them who holds power as long as they follow a certain philosophical path in life.
Right. Well, of course, someone like Epicurus could be accused of a certain escapism. He was fortunate enough to be able to buy a large garden in a suburb of Athens and to have a team of slaves and servants and a nice group of friends and lead a pleasant life. And I mean, part of me kind of sympathizes right now. I hate election season. You can't open the newspaper or turn the radio on without it just being about the election. And frankly, it isn't news to hear that Trump said X and Harris said Y. It's just not news. And it's also rather anxiety inducing as well. So part of me sympathizes with the escapist tendency. But the standard Stoic criticism of Epicureanism is, of course, that we have civic responsibilities. The Stoics were the ones who said that they are citizens of the world, and they took seriously their civic responsibilities. Paradigmatically, Marcus Aurelius, who was a miserable so-and-so, but really did think he had his duty to perform as emperor. And part of me sympathizes with that too. It's a tough one. I think, though, that as I said before, I'll repeat one thing I've said before, which is whether people agree with this or not. For most people, unless they can go completely off the grid, it really does make a difference who is in power. Because it makes a difference whether you're an immigrant being rounded up, separated from your family. It makes a difference whether you are being subjected to institutional racism. It makes a difference whether you're being subject to police violence. It makes a difference whether you've got a welfare state that provides you with some sort of foundation for an acceptable standard of living or not, in which case you are, every day you're plagued by anxiety, even hunger. There are something like 500,000 people in the United States who are homeless, even though there are something like 29 million empty houses, right? I don't think it makes a difference. There's one other point I'd want to make, partly in response to your original question, which is that the political leaders that we have, they also reflect a set of values. And Donald Trump, for example, clearly, Elon Musk too, clearly exemplifies, embodies, and proclaims the values of extravagance, the values of wealth, the values of, this is the ideal life is to have a vast estate in Florida and multiple homes elsewhere and golden staircases and this kind of thing. This is the ideal which is being put before us. I think that's misguided, of course, and I think that it's unfortunate. But you notice that this is true in many places of the world. The Russian oligarchs also have these vast yachts, that cost literally billions of dollars, and everywhere you find a certain kind of political leader and economic leader embodying the values of sort of luxury and extravagance. I would point out, though, there is nothing new about this. You can think about the Italian Renaissance. You can think about Solomon in the Bible. You can think, all through history. And interestingly, to some extent, people they don't just expect it, they almost want it. They almost admire it. Well, they do admire it. In fact, I actually think that's unfortunate, but it's not new for people to admire vast luxury and extravagance, and people think
Yes,
it's kind of
and
necessary.
you mentioned extravagance in one of the most insightful moments in your book. You talk about extravagance in a somewhat positive. Sometimes it can be a positive force. When you compare it to close-fisted types of, frugal individuals who are. So in some ways, it could be a sign of generosity. It creates jobs. People live with extravagant, like they make a living by being around extravagant people and so on and so forth, even though it has always been condemned for uh, because of its lack of virtue or something like that. But also the ascetic lifestyle, I mean, in so many cultures, has also been condemned because, in a way, they're mirror images of each other. The extravagance and asceticism, because they do not seem to participate in the responsibly in the social order.
Right. I think that one suspicion that a lot of philosophers have expressed about extravagance and
Yes.
extreme luxury is it bespeaks a certain shallowness of spirit.
Mhm.
It's someone is what is Donald Trump trying to compensate for? I mean, he doesn't read books, right? And so he's sort of, in a sense, the physical material display is a kind of substitute for spiritual depth or interestingness or something like that. And that is the standard criticism. I think it's got something going for it. I'm not saying it's true in every single case, but I think it often is true. You have to wonder, why does someone need? I recently read Thomas Wolfe's book, A Man in Full, where one of the heroes in the novel is a Stoic. But in that book, a couple of people go on a tour of Atlanta, I think it is, and there's one house which he points out, and this is, I think it's true. I think this is materially true. There's a house that's lived in by a man, his wife, and his daughter, and it has, I think, 31 bathrooms. Now, why does someone need 31 bathrooms? On the other hand, um, there's a sort of other side of that. Everyone watched Downton Abbey, didn't they? Everyone was. I don't know if you watched Downton Abbey, but it's an English earl living in a stately home, and he has kennels and he has stables and he has an estate and tenant farmers and everything like this. So yeah, and I mean, and he takes his duty very seriously. He is the centre of an entire microeconomy, on which many people depend, and. It's not according to my political ideals, but I can understand the argument from the other side. In the book, one of the things I mention, which you were getting at, is that while I personally I might tut about all this extravagance and luxury, at the same time I'm there with all the other tourists queuing up to see Versailles, queuing up to see the cathedrals of Florence and Venice and or the stately homes of England or whatever it is, or the pyramids for that matter. And the fact is that we're sort of glad, we're happy about the fact that there has been extravagance. I mean, millions of people love classical music like Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, but where would that classical music have been if it wasn't for the extravagance of the aristocrats employing complete orchestras at the time?
That's
So,
right. Yeah. Yeah. You make a very good case. That's a wonderful study of extravagance in your book, among other many interesting things in it. One thing I wanna. I mean, there's so many things. I want to talk about something Epicurus, when you talked about the essential desires, basically, without which life would not be the same. And one of them is the need to escape. The way you put it, the desire to escape danger. You say in your book. And I find this desire somewhat, oxymoronic in a way, because it's a self-defeating one. Um, so we know there's no escaping danger in a life that is indifferent to human well-being. We live in a dangerous world by definition. I mean, to try to escape danger, or to, as the Buddha would say, to avoid suffering, to me is a paradoxically lead to the excesses we find in a capitalist system, which is people try to compensate, try to protect themselves against misfortune by 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 engaging in a maniacal pursuit for wealth and power, which eventually leads to exploitation and domination, and therefore increases suffering in the world. How does one then reconcile the attempt to escape discomfort or suffering, or to avoid or to escape danger, which eventually lead to people trying to protect themselves? And in a capitalist system, most people think the way to do that is to amass huge amounts of wealth and power in order to dominate and control others.
That is a very good question, and it's a really difficult question to answer, I think, because most people who just have ordinary kind of jobs, this basically they feel they have no choice but to pretty much buy into the system. It's okay. How do you prevent yourself becoming homeless or starving or destitute or bereft of medical care or anything like that? And how do you maintain even your self-respect in a hierarchical competitive society? And the answer is you get a job and you get a wage and you sock some away and you have a pension and you buy a house, and and this is your wall against adversity. Things can still go wrong. I mean, the thing can happen. A hurricane can hit, your house can burn down, whatever. But the fact is that the entire system tells us this is what we should do. It is not the only system available. For instance, we could have a system where a little bit more, over towards the Scandinavian model, where basically we are part of a society, we're part of a community, we pay our taxes, we pay our dues to civilization, and what we're guaranteed is, insofar as anything can be guaranteed, the government guarantees that you won't be homeless, you won't be without healthcare, you won't be without an income, you won't starve. You've got a safety net. It's a good safety net. There are societies which have provided this. It is possible. In a country like the United States, which is incredibly wealthy, of course, there's plenty of money available for this. It's just that the distribution of wealth is totally out of whack. It's totally imbalanced. I myself think that I favour a very, very extensive welfare state. I think that the competitive society that we live in, with its very hierarchical distribution of wealth and the danger of destitution always present, I think it causes tens of millions of people great anxiety and suffering. And that's why in this sense, I'm a fairly straightforward utilitarian moral philosopher. I think that nerve anxiety and worry and stress are pretty bad things. Of course, there is another philosophy. I think you might have quoted Nietzsche: "Live dangerously," right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that one doesn't want to be too dogmatic. I don't know if you're familiar with a book by Ursula Le Guin called The Dispossessed. It's a
I
science
know.
novel.
Yeah.
And there's a planet and a satellite. The satellite is a kind of utopian society in which people live very simply and very morally, and the planet which they've left it's basically Las Vegas. It's decadent. It's fierce. There's crime, etc. And there's unhappiness and there's excitement and what have you. Here's the problem. The problem is that the utopian satellite is boring, and the decadent planet is kind of interesting. And it's one of the great things about the novelist, and Ursula Le Guin is a fine novelist, is it's not as if she's siding with one with the other. She's sort of wrestling with this problem, not quite resolving it. And it is a problem. I accept the fact that it's perhaps familiar with that famous line that Orson Welles delivers in the film The Third Man when he's in the Ferris wheel, and he says, "Look at Renaissance Florence, 20 years of poisonings, of intrigue, of kidnappings, of murder, and we get the Renaissance." He says, "Look at Switzerland, 500 years of peace and prosperity, and they produced the cuckoo clock." And, so there is an argument to say that a society like the United States, which is full of misery and tension and crime and nervousness and violence, also produces it produces remarkable culture. I still favour the Scandinavian model, but
Yes.
that could be a personal preference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do understand the attraction of the Scandinavian model. One of the keywords you mention in your book is happiness, and I do mention it in my review. And I haven't done. I know you teach a course on happiness. Which is wonderful. Uh, the word happiness doesn't sit well with me. I cannot picture someone like Jesus Christ being happy. It's a. I know it's foundational to modern politics. It's in the Declaration of Independence, and so I mean there's an expectation that people should be happy, but it's one of those words like capitalism. Nobody people Many people say, "Oh, I'm a capitalist," or people say that I want to be happy, but it's very they're very. I find them to be very hard to define. What exactly is happiness? So I don't know. Uh, at one time in my life, when I was and I look when I did research, I write about Islam and the West and so on. I like the notion of an Arab. I mean, nobody in the Middle Ages called themselves an Arab. They were Arab was had a very specific definition, Arab in Arabic, which is someone a Bedouin, or someone from the countryside, and it's only thanks to the British and among other factors that whole people began to see themselves as Arab in contradistinction to the Turks, or the Ottoman Turks, and so on and so forth. So it's a really invented identity. So when people say happiness, I wonder whether people in the Middle Ages, let's say in Europe, you'd find someone saying, "I want to be happy." I just can't imagine that being the case. In late antiquity, let's say in the case of Islam, or maybe in the case of Christianity as well, the best people could seek is salvation. Uh, it being understood that we are born in a very imperfect state, actually less than a desirable state, and in order for us to become whole, to be whole again, we have to reconnect with the divine. And so in the Quran, for example, in the case of Islam, God actually tells the believers that they should be very wary of their wealth, their children, and so on. All the things that in a bourgeois society are considered to be essential, indispensable for a happy life. So I I I wonder whether we are pursue. I mean, conceptually speaking, I know it could have different meanings, different understanding. Conceptually meaning, I wonder whether we're pursuing an unattainable uh, uh, ideal by in the concept of happiness.
Okay. Um, well, clearly we could talk for many hours about the concept of happiness. It's a very important concept. As I've said, I'm something of a utilitarian moral philosopher. I do actually think that the ultimate good is for human beings to live meaningful lives, rich with many and varied pleasures, and the pleasures don't have to be shallow. The pleasures of art and community and love and friendship and conversation and community with nature and all this kind of thing. So I think the first thing I would say is the concept of happiness doesn't have to be a shallow concept. It doesn't have to be just lots of little pleasures one after the other. It can be a rich concept. The second point I'd make is that in modern times we tend to have a rather subjectivist concept of happiness. We tend to think that happiness is a mental state of one kind or another, and so to give an example, you could say someone who is just a couch potato, swigging beer, smoking joints, watching old videos. You could say, "Is that a life? Is that a good life?" And someone might say, "Well, they're happy, right?" But then I would say, but it's not a good life. You could say they're happy in the sense that they have a succession of pleasurable states. But let's once again go back to the Greeks, right? And the Greeks have a more objectivist notion of happiness, right? For the Greeks, it's not just a matter of having pleasure, a succession of pleasurable states. Aristotle's pretty sensible about this. He doesn't say, "Oh, you can be perfectly happy and have no pleasures." No, pleasure is part of happiness for sure. But you also have to have friendship. You also have to have health. You also have to have a degree of prosperity for him, in the sense that you don't want to be a slave. You don't want to be a total working stiff, working at menial tasks 80 hours a week and exhausting yourself and then dying of lung disease at 40 or something. That is not a happy life, right? This is common sense. For Aristotle then, and other Greeks, they have an objectivist concept of happiness, which is more, when we say a happy life, we mean a life in which a person is able, you kind of use the word whole, right? A person is whole in the sense that they are fulfilling their human potential. They are flourishing as a human being. When you throw in the added complexity of religion and the concept of salvation, right? I think John Stuart Mill, a 19th century utilitarian philosopher, has a pretty good point here to make. He says people, Christians, he says, for instance, they can sort of dismiss this my moral philosophy based on happiness. But what do they want? They want you to have faith in Jesus. Why? So you can go to heaven. And why do you want to go to heaven? Oh, so you'll be happy, right? I mean, in other words, they'll say you might trade in some happiness in this life, but you'll get the big, payout, an eternity of happiness. And no one would think it was a sensible religion to say, "Oh, sacrifice your happiness on earth, and you'll get, probably misery in the afterlife." No, that wouldn't be a sensible thing to do. So I actually think it's very, very difficult for most people to devalue happiness. It can be, you can actually raise legitimate questions about whether happiness is the be all and the end all of everything. Nietzsche famously says, one point, he says, "Mankind does not pursue happiness, only the English do that." Speaking of John Stuart Mill, right? Another time Nietzsche says something. People ask, "Are we happy? Am I happy?" He says, "No. What matters to us is our work. In other words, our mission, the meaning of our life is our work." But what is his work? For Nietzsche, now Nietzsche doesn't care about the mass of humanity. For Nietzsche's work is to create the conditions for the existence of a few great specimens of humanity, who themselves will experience remarkable heights of joy, of bliss, of ecstasy. It's just that, and that's what has value for him. He doesn't care about the rest of us. But I care about that. Normal people do care about the rest of us. I mean, right now, why are we so distraught about what's happening in Gaza? It's because of the suffering. It's because the suffering, right? Why do we want a ceasefire? So that the suffering can stop.
Yeah, no, I see. I agree that we all want to be in a state of well-being, rationally and subjectively we do. But intellectually, don't we know that, let's say, life, the mere fact of being in this world, in this natural environment, which is not designed, which has never been designed for our well-being or for our best interests. I mean, isn't suffering, isn't pain the actual natural condition of our lives?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
What I think is normal human beings
Yes.
aren't normal human beings don't have a perfectly uncheckered, easy life of uh, unbroken happiness. Right? We all experience loss. We all experience some pain, some suffering. That's the human condition.
Okay.
But actually, um, the normal people also experience lots of pleasure. They find pleasure in their relationships, pleasure in their children, pleasure in community, pleasure in the arts, pleasure in their work. Sometimes, pleasure. I mean, if anyone listening to this podcast, ask yourself, what kinds of things have you done in the last month? Have you been out for a meal with friends and enjoyed it? Have you got together with the family and enjoyed it? Have
Yes.
you gone on a hike and enjoyed it, and then enjoyed having having a rest afterwards? I mean, simple pleasures make up a good part of our lives, and I think that yes, there's definitely the normal human condition is to have to experience some pain, some loss. But I don't think that's the default condition at all times. I mean, I think that someone who is experiencing that as the default condition is someone would say is depressed,
Yeah.
not a
No, I mean,
psychological.
yeah, that's why I think, the mystical traditions, the Sufis and, the Buddha, if you wish, the some of I don't know, but there's an attempt to detach oneself from the temptations of the world, because and seek joy and happiness, in some other spiritual realm. Which, I as I was reading, as I was thinking about questions for you, I was reminded of Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1848, when he, basically at some point in those texts, he looks, in the Middle Ages, say, the priest was the mediated between the individual and their God, because they promised salvation, they promised, all these kinds all the things you mentioned in the hereafter. And then with the emergence of capitalism and the secular world order and so on and so forth, it was now the salesperson who is now promising happiness through the sale of products, money, industrial products, and so on and so forth. So all the things you mentioned, like pleasures going to the theater, pleasures going to the opera, you know, um, pleasures having a view of the ocean, or enjoying a sunset. Have always thought, maybe I'm totally wrong, Emrys, and I've always thought that all of these things are socially, historically conditioned. I mean, they have not been considered to be pleasures all throughout history. It's most of them are modern inventions, including having a house by the ocean front and enjoying the view and so on and so forth. For most of history, people preferred to live inland, not by the beach, by the ocean, because the ocean was a dangerous place. So it's maybe history keeps intruding on my thinking about what constitutes. I don't think there's an absolute value for any of the things that we are talking about, like happiness, pleasure. They're all socially and historically conditioned.
Um, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean,
Okay.
clearly, many of our pleasures are very contemporary. I mean, skydiving, rock climbing, and this kind of thing. However, um, when I've taught the course on happiness, I mean, inevitably at some point I ask the students, okay, what do you enjoy doing most? What are your number one pleasures in life? Always, without fail, always the number one pleasure is hanging out with friends. And that's still, and surely that does go back to prehistory, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that, and I mean, you can in any literary tradition, any philosophical tradition, you can go back 2,000, 3,000 years, and you'll find reports of people wining and dining together, I mean, people being in love, people having loyal friends, this kind of thing. So I think that amongst the most important ingredients of happiness in most people's lives are their relationships. Aristotle famously said that a man who lives outside the polis is either a beast or a god, but not a human being, because human beings aren't self-sufficient. We depend on each other. And I think that, so while I agree that many of our pleasures are modern, the pleasures of sex, the pleasures of eating, the pleasures of companionship, the pleasures of love, um, the pleasures of relaxation, of rest after work, the pleasures of falling asleep. Um,
Yes, yes,
you know,
yeah.
and the pleasures of dance, the pleasures of music. I mean, dance and music and visual art; those are pretty old too. I mean, there's no beginning to people dancing. I mean, it goes back into prehistory, right? And so I'd say, no, there's some pretty traditional pleasures thrown in there.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. Um, yeah, it's one of the pleasures actually is the pleasures of reading. And the other day, the New York Times, I was saying, opinion piece column in the New York Times, somebody writing that college students do not read anymore. I don't know
Yeah,
whether you saw that piece.
yeah, I
Uh,
read that.
okay, so what do you think of that? I mean, in terms of people are no longer reading now, and how could they have a meaningful, good life in the way that you present it in your book, um, if this practice is virtually disappearing? Oh, the thing I wanted to say is you're talking about the fundamental need for companionship and friendship and community, and we know it's been going on for decades now. People talking about bowling alone, an epidemic of loneliness in the United States, and which is causing huge damage to the fabric of social life in that, and so uh, is that an effect, would you say, of the current economic system, or there is something else at play which is leading to this massive fragmentation of society, if not a massive failure of society? When I travel around the globe, when I meet people and people ask me, "How's the United States?" I'm sure you get the same question because we are born elsewhere. Um, I always said, I mean, I confirm everybody else's knowledge of the United States. It's a superpower. It's an economic hegemon. It's the empire of our times. But I cannot help but insinuate that it's also a failed society in terms of they haven't developed the rituals. The United States, America hasn't developed the rituals of community, of bringing people together in a non transactional way.
Right. Um, I would say myself, I don't think the United States is necessarily all that exceptional there. It
Okay.
may be a leader, but I think that, I don't think there's a single cause for the epidemic of loneliness, the individualism, the isolation, that kind of thing. First of all, we don't want to exaggerate it. In 3 weeks' time, I'll be getting together at Thanksgiving with about 50 or 60 other people, and it will be a riotous, blessed, raucous, communal occasion, and that will be true for millions of other people too. So we don't want to say, oh, no one has any social life anymore. There is loneliness, there is isolation. I think, though, that yes, to some extent, that is a product of capitalism, which is A, individualistic, and B, competitive. The competitiveness really is significant, I think. It's the nature of society. At the same time, there are other causes which aren't necessarily just capitalism, but have to do with modernity. I'm not a religious person, but I do think that the general decline of religion, the secularization of modern societies everywhere, um, it has a very, very profound effect on community and on people's psychology, and not necessarily a good one. I think that, it, but I'm not very articulate about exactly what this disenchantment of the world, this almost global, secularization tendency. I'm not exactly clear how it affects people's quality of life and relationships. But I mean, to give you an example, not that long ago, I mean, let's say in England, a century or so ago, in the 19th century, we're talking earlier about the wonderful 19th century and Jane Austen and all this kind of thing. Well, in Jane Austen's novels, what happens every Sunday? Every Sunday, everyone goes to church. And
Hmm.
what do they do there? Well, they get together and they see who's wearing what hat and who's sitting next to whom, and they chat beforehand and they chat afterwards, and and it's the center of the community. That's where they will be baptized. That's where they will be married. That's where they will be buried. That's where they go every Sunday to commune with their village, right? Um, and now, at my university, it's a constant complaint of people like me and lots of other people. We try and organize an event, and everyone's on Zoom. So there's supposed to be
Yes.
150 people getting together, chatting beforehand, chatting afterwards, sort of going for a drink afterwards. But no, they're not. They are on Zoom. So my point there is, I've kind of transitioned. I'm saying secularization of society has an effect. Technology has an effect. I mean, again, I live in a college village, college town, and it's a fact that if you walk across campus on a beautiful Saturday in September, you won't see many people on campus. They're all in their rooms looking at these things.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
50 years ago, that wasn't true. So
That's right.
technology
And
has
and
had a effect too.
and the reason it's part of what I think your work, and I try to do somewhat the same. It's like I challenge people. There's an assumption that progress is invariably good, and it's part of the secular ethos. It's probably a result of the twin revolutions, industrial revolution combined with the rise emergence of capitalism, and so there is a embedded assumption that this phone, when it was created, is an unquestioned good, and not to adapt to its uses. To adapt to it, it would be that you are Luddite, even though that's an interesting conversation, or or you are a reactionary of some kind. Today, so I am thinking about the humanities, and I think we are in the midst of a major civilizational crisis because of the decline, because of the impact of all this technology and so on the humanities, on the study of the humanities. People think the humanities are um, dispensable. I think it's the opposite. A society without a robust culture of the humanities is doomed to failure, is doomed to decline. They think engineers and business MBAs are the solution. I think the humanities, if it would be a tremendous failure for society if we underfunded and didn't take care of our humanity. So, and nowadays, the new argument people have is artificial intelligence. They say if you do not adapt, if you do not kind of embrace artificial intelligence, you will be left behind like a dinosaur or something. It's the same argument they used to say about other things. So, they, what do you think of this assumption then that, which is a result of this industrial revolution and and the along with the rise of capitalism, that progress is basically accepting any technological innovation, however injurious it may be to the social fabric, as inevitable.
Um, right. I think that definitely technological progress is a bit of a juggernaut. It is very, very difficult to stop. You take the example of the phone. If you'd have asked 50 years ago, hey, people, how would you like a little device that allows you to communicate with anyone, anywhere in the world, at any time? I mean, and it's astonishing. It contains all of the world's music, all of the world's films, all of the world's TV, all the world's books, all the world's news. It's all there. The best encyclopedia ever. It's all here. Would that be a good thing? We'd all say yes, wouldn't we? I mean, we'd say that's incredible. That's amazing. You mean I can right here while I'm on a plane over the Atlantic, I can watch a rugby match going on in New Zealand, live. This is yes. I want one. But of course, yes. What happens time and time again is that the positive aspect of a technological innovation is obvious. The negative aspect comes later. I mean, the Industrial Revolution, we loved getting trains and cars and things like that. But then we have to deal with global warming and pollution and this sort of thing. So in the case of this technology, yeah, we are becoming aware of the downside, the diminishing attention spans, the sort of addictive nature of it, the isolation it can cause, the inadequate substitute for real life gatherings. With artificial intelligence, I think to be honest, it's more of the same. I think it's very, very difficult to stop. If the only way you can stop something like that is through international regulation, which everyone signs on to. If for instance you had very strict regulations about the development of artificial intelligence in the US, well, then the people are just going to go somewhere else. If necessary, they'll go onto a boat in the middle of the ocean and do it. I'll give you, I think, another kind of technology which is really, really disturbing to me, and this is perhaps going off topic a little bit, but is the biological enhancement, genetic enhancement of babies. I think that I think it's going to be very difficult to stop because the scientists and the engineers and the technologists will just pursue their goals. And if one country chooses to say, no, we're not going to go there, well, another country will do that because it's not just that capitalism is competitive, the world is competitive. I mean, China and Russia and Brazil and the US and Germany and France and the UK and India, Argentina, South Africa are in competition with each other. Like it or not, I mean, that's how they see. That's how they see themselves. They see themselves as in competition. Do you not agree with that?
I think there is a new kind of imperialism that is happening. I call it Silicon Valley imperialism. I mean, I go to Morocco. Let's say you're in the middle of small town in Morocco university, giving a lecture, and people would say the same thing, that the inevitability of artificial intelligence, that it's here to stay, and there's no way of avoiding it. There is a certain kind of fatalism that I hear from people, that these technologies are thrust upon us and they come from somewhere. It's not that we invented them. And we need now to adapt to them or else we'll be left behind. It's the same argument you find in African literature of the mid 20th century, how the Africans dealt with the French colonialism, in the sense you either adapt to the French secular ways or else you're going to be destroyed forever. So it's like there,
Right.
but there is a geographical element in all of this. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, let's be conservative. Like 80% of this technology is coming from one tiny part of the globe, which is California. Where Facebook, Google, Twitter, you now artificial intelligence and whatever it is, it's coming. It's a small group of people. There must be some of the cultural and psychological assumptions embedded in this making of this technology, and suddenly it's exported to the rest of the world. It's not just like America. Halloween now is being celebrated everywhere in Morocco as well. And so I keep asking people, why are we celebrating Halloween? And it's like it has everything American eventually becomes a global phenomenon. It's not that people decided that we needed Facebook. It's not that people decided. So there this fatalistic embrace of technologies not of our own making, uh, it seems as they have descended from heaven. They not. They came from a specific place on the planet, a specific society with its own cultural, psychological assumptions, and we just embrace them as inevitable. And that's something I don't think that has been fully, in my opinion, sort of studied.
Right. Well, I think the good point there, which is that definitely, people are responsible. I think that one point I make is I'm not sure that it's so completely coming out of Silicon Valley as perhaps you may. I think China is becoming increasingly important in the development of these new technologies, and I think that's likely to continue. Um, but it is very noticeable how much of it does come out of America. I suppose I don't want to be fatalistic here, but um, one of the things is um, about this kind of new technology, about technological revolutions, how it's impossible to go back. You're probably familiar with the discussions of the agricultural revolution of 3,000 years ago, and how it's been called the greatest swindle ever, because what happens is people go from foraging and hunting gathering to growing grain and storing it, and it seems like this is a good idea because it means that you've got food for the winter, and you can store things and that kind of thing. But in no time at all, what happens is you get an increased population, and now there's no going back. You can't any longer feed this population with berries and nuts, and so you then have then grows up an administration, a government, which demand taxes and this kind of thing. Before you know it, you've got you've got something approaching what we call civilization, and there's no going back. It's the same way. We can't go back to before cars. We can't go back to before planes, and we can't go back to before cell phones. We just can't. I mean, it can't happen. You can't function in the modern world without without a cell phone now,
What
and that's a problem. But I don't see a solution to it.
the
So
only
I'm
thing I say to that, and which will bring me back to your key concept, one of your keywords in the book, it's happiness. It's like when I talk to my children or people of us, younger people and so on, the assumption is one can only be happy with these phones, with this technology, with the internet, and so on and so forth, or with medical progress, like you mentioned, or biotechnology, or whatever it is that's available. I have a son who keeps telling me that if I wait 5 more years, they will come up with some medical invention that would prolong my life indefinitely. so, that kind of thing. But happiness is a state of mind. I mean, I'm sure, like you did, I grew up without the internet, without a cell phone, without the computer, without everything else. And life then in Morocco, which is was considered a poor third world country, was no less delightful, was no less intense. The happiness was palpable. And so there is the tendency to associate the state of happiness with um, with adapting to whatever is fashionable at this moment. And I just simply don't think so.
I would question the word fashionable there, because
Well, yeah,
how it's often been said that necessity is the mother of invention. Well, one writer, Juliet Shaw, said, no, it's invention is the mother of necessity.
yes.
They invent the iPhone, they invent the cell phone, and now we absolutely have to have one. I mean, if you applied for a job now and they said, oh yes, could we have your phone number, please? And you said, oh, I don't have a phone. Well, then you're not going to get the job. They'd say, they'll
Yes,
say, what kind of person are you that doesn't have a phone?
yes,
And we say, well, okay, what about your email address? I don't have a computer. You don't have a
yes,
phone. You don't have a computer. You're applying for
yes.
this job. Sorry. uh, you just can't function. Where I live, you really can't function without a car. You just
Yes.
can't. There isn't
Yes.
adequate public transport, and so I don't think it's just a matter of being fashionable. If when we think about teenagers, right?
Yes.
To be a teenager without a cell phone now is to be ostracized. It's like being Seneca or Cicero rather on some remote island somewhere. You are totally out of it. So I don't think it's fashion. I think there's a little bit of fashion, but most of it is you just have to conform to your community if you want to be a, a sort of part of that community, not looked at askance by everyone.
Yeah, this is a wonderful discussion. In when I did the interview with Patrick Deneen, he reminded me so much of Christopher Lasch, and Christopher Lasch, but the one and only having, the critics of progress throughout European history, and it's fascinating to see how they thought about all of this. So, in essence, I think it's the sentiment of happiness, or whatever sentiment of joy, or of love and gratitude. I think they, if we could say that, I mean, they probably, and it's not the term to use, they transcend uh, time and history. You could have the same exact feeling that somebody's experiencing by watching a beautiful sunset in California that a farmer in ancient Egypt was getting. The same exact emotion by watching, or by just being, by feeding his child or something. I mean, it's not, it's it's not it's not contingent on time and place. The feeling of happiness, or the feeling of this kind of essential feelings that define us.
But I wonder. I wonder if, going back to when you said how, growing up in Morocco, a few decades ago, oh,
Yes.
it's great. We didn't have all the technology, but we were happy. But go back a little bit further, right, to
Mhm.
before there are any kind of anesthetics, before there are antibiotics. Um, for instance, my grandparents in South Wales, I know that several times they were on the point of being evicted from their little house. I know that two of the 8 children died in childhood. I know that my grandmother had a nervous breakdown, and they were permanently, constantly worried about money. They never had any money. There were times when the children were hungry. This kind of thing. Um, my father, who died quite a few years ago, but I mean, he remembers the childhood quite fondly. You know. At the same time, there was a lot of anxiety, and there was a lot of pain. I mean,
Yes.
when I ask my happiness students, if you could be born in a previous time, when would you choose? Most of them choose something like their parents' generation, or perhaps a little bit further, '60s maybe, or something. None of them want to go back to a time when there was no anesthetics, when dental equipment was a pair of pliers, when when there were no antibiotics, when life expectancy was so much lower. I mean, when it was, life expectancy was, when 50% of women died in childbirth. Um, so what would you say if I accuse you of rose tinted spectacles as you look back?
I see. I'm convinced that you mentioned, like, life expectancy. There was no expectation to live beyond a certain age. There was no expectation to have perfect teeth. I mean, I grew up. When I was a kid, I never went. I mean, the only time people went to a dentist is to pull a tooth. Uh, and now everybody, it's every child in the world right now, and people of, if their parents have the means to do so, everybody does orthodontic work on their mouth. So, I mean, if it has become an expectation to have perfect teeth, you know uh, uh, is is that a good thing? I mean, you know.
Not really, no. But I'll give you another example. For instance,
Yes.
go back three generations when
Yes.
people decided they needed to leave Morocco, they needed to emigrate, right?
Hmm.
I've just been reading a book about Ireland, right? And I mean, as you know, in the 19th century, millions of people left Ireland. When they
Hmm.
left and said goodbye to their parents, they were saying goodbye forever.
Hmm.
There was no likelihood that they would ever see them again.
Yes.
Now we've got airplanes, and we're a little bit more, generally speaking, there's more general prosperity. So now, when you emigrate, as I emigrated, as you emigrated, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't mean you say goodbye to ever to your
That's right.
forever to your family. That aren't we glad about that?
You know, you see, we just have our differences in this matter because I emotionally, when I remember, okay, I guess, I lived it. I mean, thank God. I mean, it's almost, I tell my kids in the United States who were born and raised in the United States, so that's like, I feel like I've come from the Middle Ages right into the 21st century. And I kind of like the Middle Ages. There was something there that was very satisfying, and so I remember the first day I went to college. I traveled from Tangier to Fez, which is now like, it's a big, families that they came with me down to the bus station, and people were crying and giving me food, and and when I went to Fez, I was writing letters to my family, and there was, it was a big. It was like you're traveling. You felt like you were traveling. You're leaving your hometown to some other city, which is
Right.
now,
Yeah.
you know, uh, that feeling does not exist anymore. Now we think of mass tourism, and
Yeah.
Paul Bowles, a writer who lived in Tangier, um, uh, when people used to travel with suitcases, like big 5, 6 suitcases, and then they land in a place and they would stay there for months, and there's no way to communicate with their home country, and that travel, which comes from the word travailler, which means work,
Yeah.
was work. Now it's has become so easy as to become, I don't know, trivialized.
Well, I think you have a good point here, which is it's not just travel. You could say that nowadays we are sort of jaded about remarkable experiences, right? I
Yes.
mean, it's perfectly true. I mean, 100 years ago, if the circus came to town with one lion, one elephant, and a clown, everyone went to see it, and it was the height of the month. Now because of what's available on YouTube, television, film, and that. I mean, we expect the absolutely extraordinary. Otherwise, why bother? I think you have a good point there that we can become jaded about many experiences because they've become too easy, or because we compare them with the most extraordinary stuff that is available to us through technology. But I don't think we have to be disagreeing. Really, what's happening here, I think, is we're talking about progress, and I'm
Yeah.
sort of saying, well, yeah, on the one hand, that we are glad about this, and then you're saying, yes, but on the other hand, what about this? And I'm saying, well, good point. But then on the other hand, what about this? And so the thing
Yes.
is, our conclusion is progress has good and bad sides to it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. I mean, no, but the depth, I'll come back to one more thing, which is alienation. In Marx's concept of alienation, if I understand it correctly, and I was, as you know, I'm a big fan of Marx's, of his writings and everything. I mean, alienation is being alienated from your natural human functions through the invention of some kind of technology. I'm not, in his case, the labor, the kind of labor that was imposed on the workers in a factory and so on was alienating to them. But alienation can take on the shape also of, you buy a car, you walk less, and all kinds of health issues arise out of that condition, and so on and so forth. So everything that is supposed to augment your human life through the invention of technology is simultaneously a a blow, an impoverishment of the same person's human abilities. And so and it's obviously of that person's life, because the the that person is being deprived of exploiting all their human functions
Right.
without the support of technology. And
Okay.
that's why I think reading, the decline of reading, to me is a frightening thing, because you could have a lot of information. You can go to you can get any information instantly from any device, but reading does something to you that's more than giving you information.
Right. I would say about that, I'd say a couple of points. One is going back to Marx's concept of alienation, right, which is a very rich concept, and he talks about being alienated from oneself, from one's work, from one's life, from other people, from community, and like. I think that you're absolutely right that what's happened, our modern lifestyles, are inevitably, I would say, so much of our experiences are mediated. They're mediated through technology,
Mhm.
right? And we're kind of somewhat aware of that, and it causes a certain dissatisfaction. There's a sort of lack of immediacy in our ways of doing things. I mean, I often tell my students, again, when we're talking about this, say, when I was an undergraduate, no one had phones. When we just used to go around to people's houses and knock on the door and say, "Can you come out to play?" And they're amazed. um, Everything is mediated now by the phones and by technology. There's another concept as well as mediation, and this is more directly, I think, concerned with your concern, and that's passivity. The fact is that for Marx, the ultimate kind of purpose in life, if you want, for a person was self-expression. They expressed themselves through their work, and their work could be all kinds, many different kinds of work. The paradigmatic example would be the artist, who is obviously using creativity to express themselves. But your work can be your children, your work can be your garden, your work can be, all kinds. It can be political organization, but you express yourself through it, and in that you achieve a particular kind of fulfillment, a particular kind of satisfaction, a kind of almost a self-objectification. You see yourself and the fruits of yourself out there in the world. There's shades of that in Plato's Symposium, where he talks about the desire for immortality. In one sense, you make babies, but in another sense, you create works. And that, I think that one of the sad aspects of technology is that it can make us more passive. We can become passive recipients instead of active
Mhm.
participants in many activities. However, again, we're back to where we were before. It's also true that technology enables you to be active in some ways. You can communicate with people across the world. You've got nowadays people can make their own videos. They can take their own photos. They can do all kinds of things using technology if they want to be creative and active as opposed to passive.
Emrys, this is we need to have several sessions. If you accept my invitation, I mean, really, this is our inaugural remote conversation series, and I feel like I'm just starting. I'm just beginning to getting involved in to explore these ideas with you. Well, I guess we will stop here, and I hope you can join me again in the near future for
Sure,
another
anytime.
conversation.
It's a total pleasure.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emrys, for enlightening us, for writing this wonderful book. I haven't read your previous book. It sounds fascinating. Both sound fascinating, but hopefully I'll have to be able to go back to those. There's something I'm realizing in this conversation that you describe yourself as a utilitarian philosopher, and I'm
Sort of.
probably I'm probably more inclined towards the romantic side, you know, and so
I'm not. I'm not a sort of dyed in the wool, absolute down the line, all the way utilitarian.
yes,
I think that on the whole, human, people's well-being, in flourishing happiness, in a rich sense, is the point of it all. That I don't really have, it seems to me that ultimately the goal of politics and the like should be to enable people to live richer, happier lives. That's
So if you were the ruler of France and some crazy engineer or businessman came to you, or some philosopher came to me and said, we should build another Notre Dame in Paris or in France, and you would not question their sanity, right?
yeah, well, I certainly would. I mean, I'd say that there's better things to do with the money. you know, you know. How about extend education to more people?
That's right. That's right. That's right. So the extravagance that all of these monuments that eventually we end up loving, I mean, they doesn't seem to have. I mean, they had a utilitarian function in the sense that people were doing it for this in the name of the divine or to express their faith uh, uh, as an expression of their devotion. Um, but that it could also maybe I don't know whether you see that as also utilitarian or not. I don't know.
Um, well, in one sense, it is in the sense that it's believed that society needs to take care of its religious duties in order to for everyone's soul to be saved, and in that sense, the church people that they're acting on behalf of the community. On the other hand, cathedrals were built while people were starving. Um,
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah.
And on that note, we're going to stop and thank you so much.